Today here we're talking about taking opportunities where you can get them. So I was chit-chatting with a friend of mine on Instagram. This is how you meet people these days, apparently, on the internet. And he was asking me about my Pentax 6.7 and whether or not, how I felt about it, what I liked about it. And he's a local guy, and so I said, well, why don't you just, borrow it for a couple days and shoot some film, and then you can get a sense as to how the camera works. It's describing a camera and using a camera are like everything. It's like describing a car and driving a car. It's much, much better to have it in your hands just to see if it works for you. So, so he thought that was very kind of me, which I suppose it was. But then he said, oh, I actually have something you might want to borrow. So he asked me if I would want to borrow his Hasselblad. Actually, it's not even, it's the 50-year limited edition Man on the Moon Hasselblad what's it called? CFV II, and the 907X body that goes along with it. And I said, sure, that would be great, knowing full well how expensive it is and what a lopsided loaner it was. But anyway, I'll just show you here real quick. It comes all snug in a box like that. Today we're not talking about the 907X for a number of reasons, one of which is there's lots of videos out there about it already. The second thing is I don't own a single lens that would go on this camera. Now, of course, there's adapters that you can get to adapt pretty much any lens you want to it. But given that I don't own this camera, I don't own any adapters. So, but we do have the back, which is actually really quite something. It is, put that over there. It's the holy grail of Hasselblad shooters is to be able to use something like this or like this, 500 series, 200 series, or 500 cm 203 FE, and have a digital back that you could just snap on the back of the camera and run with. There was a back that would go on the 203 FE, but you had to send the body to Hasselblad to have it modified so that it would work with the back. And I never loved it that much to have that done. So, so when this came out, I was really rather intrigued. And so this is a quick review about using these cameras with the digital back and just how it all goes. So, pretty straightforward. As much fun as it is to. It's you take off your film back. Oh, hang on. Let me do this properly. Let's take off that. And because the problem is the sensor is right there. There's you sneeze or make a mistake and you end up getting a big smudge on it. There's a piece of glass over top of the sensor, so it's not that bad. But rather, it's rather challenging to, or it could be very challenging if you were to make a mistake at that point. Give the back a little wiggle to make sure it's not going anywhere. And so what you do is you turn the back on, and 50 years, Man on the Moon. And this is so cool. You go into menu, you go to the camera icon, you go to camera body, you tap on camera body, you go to 200, and then you go back there, and then, oh, no card. Can you just grab a card out of that, just out of the, perfect. Now, the cards, this back is a bit of a beast. Thank you. And it requires really fast cards. And they also go in backwards, label away from you. I made that mistake the first time I tried it. So, no card, no images in this folder. All right. Anyway, so basically what you do, so where was I? Oh, we're going to go back here. ISO, I don't know, 200. Turn my camera to manual. Actually, I'm going to go program, and I'm going to set my ISO here for 200. 200, and focus, and shoot. And hello. What's going on? Oh, maybe maybe I should. Maybe I should format raw. I figured it would just shoot even though we didn't format the card, but probably best practices. Storage, format SD1, format. Okay. 601 frames. And on aperture priority, shooting wide open, and oops, wind the camera, because of course, there we go, just like that. It's that simple. The only, well, there's a couple of fiddly things with it, one of which is that you end up, unless you actually have a crop in the camera, it's hard to tell what you're shooting, because of course it's a horizontal out of a 6x6 frame. But you know, that's easy. You know, you can. Yeah, I'm sure you can get one without too much trouble. And the shutter button is really touchy. So if you tap the button with your finger, it'll take a photo, which is no big deal, except if you have a slow card in here, because like I was saying, the fast card is essential because it's dumping a huge amount of data to the card. And if you have a slow card, it's a challenge, because by the time you're ready to take a photograph, it's still thinking about writing to the card, and that has nothing to do with the speed of the camera. It has everything to do with the speed of the card, and it's not asking too much to get a couple of big cards. So, but you can just go. You can go and you can shoot. So, so moving along with the 203, I wanted to shoot with the 110 f2 because the 110 f2 is my all-time favorite lens on the Hasselblad system, and I love shooting it at f2. And I was curious about what it would look like if I did some portraits. So, just before I took some photos of my daughter, just with some window light, and we'll be showing you those, just to get a sense as to how does a 1980s era lens work with a 2020 era, 2019 era digital back. And it's not bad. It's, you know, there's a lot more mojo in the lens than I mean, the lens has always got lots of mojo, but you really do get a certain amount of romance. But it's a good lens. I mean, it's not like there's all kinds of weird vignetting, and there is some fringing in terms of if you have a specular highlight and then you have it move from the transition between the specular highlight and a non-specular highlight, you get a bit of fringing there from time to time, but it's actually surprisingly good. And then I went for a wander with the dog in the forest with the 40 mil. This is the CF FLE version, and it was very dark in the forest, of course, and it was challenging to get some good shots, but you know, it actually worked like a champ. I was really surprised. Certainly a lot of the shots that I did were backlit, and you've got deep shadow and dark greens, and everything that digital backs really challenged or really are challenged with, and then interspersed with, you know, highlights between the trees and stuff like that, and it handled it all surprisingly well with the 40 mil. So the 203 and the 40 mil, aside from the fact that the shutter button is really twitchy, aside from the fact that it kind of chews through batteries, and you only get one battery with this, and there's no charger that comes with it, so another battery and a dual battery charger would be very helpful. And then, but then we went and we shot in the studio. We shot right here with the 500 cm with the 120 mil macro lens, which is again one of my all-time favorite lenses. And I wanted to see how it worked in a tethered shooting environment. So on the 500 cm, you just change on the back to camera 500 series, and we, you know, as I'll explain later, we had a real challenge getting the camera to work properly with the studio flashes, because there's a whole bunch of wires that you need to figure out. You can't actually, well, I don't know if you can or not, trigger it directly from the lens, but I didn't have the right PC socket, and so it was a bit of a challenge. But we did manage to solve that problem, which was great, and it was rock solid. I was really surprised. I didn't expect that this thing would work as well as it did with a brand new back, shooting into the Focus software that Hasselblad has. And I was amazed. It actually worked out much better than I would have thought. And files came in quickly. The 120 macro actually worked out surprisingly well, given, again, that it's a 25-year-old or more year-old lens design. And you know, and on the tripod, shooting my grandfather's Minox camera, which is around here somewhere, it looked really good. So, you know, I mean, so this is, it is a challenge. There's going to be, this is not your 50 megapixel Fuji or Canon or Nikon DSLR. I mean, this, putting a brand new piece of equipment on an ancient piece of equipment, there is going to be some compromises that are going to have to be made. And there are going to be situations where you're going to look around and go, oh, didn't see that one coming. So that said, though, this is one of the very few places you can use the 110 f2 on a 203 body with a digital back, and it works. And hats off to Hasselblad. I mean, I'm surprised that they were able to get this thing to work with this thing and this thing as well as it does. I didn't expect that I didn't expect that it would actually. I figured it would be more challenging, and yet lo and behold, it worked out just fine. So there you have it. So I highly recommend the digital back if you want to use this camera, or if you insist on using this camera. That said, the integrated systems that people come up with now, the Fuji, the Hasselblad, it's, by any measure, it's a better system. It's, more reliable, it's less of a kludge, and, the chrome in the back, black, match. But the back does work on the camera. All right, okay, so 500 cm from, 1980, 81, I think. I bought it in 1994. My first Hasselblad. Shot a lot of jobs with it. It now sits in a cupboard, but it still works, I think. 120mm macro lens, the CF version that I love, actually, great lens. And I've got a little short 8mm extension tube on it. So here is the 50C back, and it goes on. For the love of God, you don't drop it because there's no strap or anything. It goes on, and then here's the trick. Put it on, make sure it's in there, give it a little wiggle, make sure it's actually on. So, and then we've got our tether cable, which plugs in to the computer running Focus software, which is the tethering software that Hasselblad uses. And I don't know if you can tether to Lightroom, but you probably can. Anyway, so, and then we plug it in, and we get it set, and we cross our fingers, and we see what we get. Oh, there we go. Hasselblad CFV II, C, ISO, shutter, type, aperture, exposure, light meter, all that kind of stuff. Ready to go. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to connect the camera to the flash. Now, we're actually going to do a video on this because it was so incredibly challenging. But what we have is, looking around for the wire. Where is the wire? So, micro mini, oops. So, from the lens to the back, like that. Now, from the back to the pocket wizard with one of those. So, flash out to there, and let's see what we got. That's a good sign. It's about 2 stops overexposed. Turn on, how do I turn on? There we go, highlight. And I want to go to, say, F8. And F8.5. This is my grandfather's Minox camera, by the way. Kind of ironic that I'd be shooting such a small camera with such a large camera, but we need these shots for our next video anyway. Except, of course, that I need a fill card that I can't reach because I'm tied to my microphone. Really nice. Looks good. So now what I want is I also want a shot without the flash because the Minox camera on its own is more like that. Whoops. Anyway. So that's nice. 50 megapixels. A bit of a confusing thing, but as I'll point out in another video, I once ran into a problem many years ago when I first got my digital back, my first digital back, where I plugged it directly into an old, well, I don't even think they're in business anymore, an old Speedotron power pack, and thankfully, they had a little capacitor in the pack that would blow rather than destroying the digital back. So it was a $500 mistake as opposed to a $10,000 mistake. But it had to go to Sweden for 8 weeks to get fixed. And as a consequence, I was reminded, thankfully, recently that it's really, really, really bad idea to plug any digital back or any digital piece of equipment on any level directly into a power pack, no matter how good it might be, for that obvious reason. Often the voltage that's used to, especially with an older power pack, the voltage that was used on, to get the lens to fire it, they didn't care. I mean, it was just, all you do is just connect, complete the circuit, and the pack was fired. So ever since then, I've always used remote triggers, and I haven't had a problem since. And goodness knows, given that I borrowed this back, the last thing I wanted was to send it back, pardon the pun, broken or damaged, because I like it, but I don't like it that much. So anyway, so moving right along. So what we found is that, we'll show you the images, and also 100% zoom in, so showing the 120 macro with the extension tube on the 80, or not on the 80, on the 500 cm with the brand new digital back. Aside from the fact that it appears to be, it appears to be a little bit of a Frankenstein kind of thing, but it has to do with the fact, I guess, that this isn't chrome. But otherwise, it seems to work just fine. I'm 8.5 at a 60th, and I'm getting what I think is actually a really nice image. Like, given how it could work, it actually works surprisingly well. So I think that, I'm not going to say that it was. I'm not going to say. I guess the question would say, would I spend $10,000 or whatever the number is on this back for this? And my response would be no. I wouldn't do that. But I shoot film anyway. And that's what I use these cameras for. So for me, the digital is best used elsewhere anyway. But if you've got an old 500 cm kicking around and you really want to shoot those old lenses with the digital back, that's the one to get, and it'll work for you.